Okay. Hello, Facebook world. We are live. Just give me a second. I got Kate Birch here. You guys could see her. I'm just making sure I share this feed to the various different groups and make my own wall public because unfortunately, when I'm doing this, it automatically puts it on to friends. So we're live with Kate Birch. I'm really excited to have her. Bear with me as I share this around to our other people out there in the Facebook world, also broadcasting on Twitter and YouTube. I'm Jay Cherry. This is Below the Surface. We're live with Kate Birch, and we're going to be talking about homeopathy, vaccines, and vaccine injury. Let's see. Make sure I get this all shared. So live in the house with Kate Birch. And thank you so much, Kate, for being here. And I'm just sharing this to a bunch of different groups. Let's see. Okay, let me just get one more group in here. All right, that's good for now. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it a lot.
Hi. Yeah.
So we first met back in Washington, D.C., and I invited you to come on the show. We had a great discussion. So we were talking today, planning our show, and we were talking about hopefully I say this correctly, homeoprophylaxis. And one of the moms asked yesterday about homeoprophylaxis and titers and vaccines. We were just having an interesting discussion. You care to jump right into that?
Yeah. Well, let's see. So, there's a lot to talk about, especially with the vaccine mandates coming and people trying to figure out ways to navigate that and looking at, is homeoprophylaxis an option to satisfy state vaccine requirements? And what are those vaccine requirements? And there's a lot of sort of different avenues that we can go down and talk about that. And then we can also look at, what are vaccines actually doing in the immune system and why we might be, wanting to do something different, i.e. homeoprophylaxis. And so I don't know where to start with, but I could start by saying that, first of all, the idea that once you have antibodies, you're immune is a partial truth about how the immune system works. So when you acquire natural disease and you go through a normal immunological process that activates your peripheral membranes, activates fever and discharge, which in turn activates antibody response, then you have true immunity. That's a T1 and T2 relationship to that pathogen, right? And you can really only get that through a natural disease exposure. Now, in the vaccine science, they use their litmus test of vaccine efficacy in a petri dish. Does this vaccine produce immune cells to produce antibodies, right? And that immune response produced by those cells in that petri dish is a petri dish experiment. It is not a human experiment. Because our immune system works through first visceral contact with whatever that pathogen is, and then we produce an immune response like that. And sometimes we can produce a general immune response, such as fever and discharge, without actually producing antibodies, because that general immune response has actually kept it so that the pathogen doesn't enter the physical body. It's only when the pathogen has perforated through the membranes that then the white blood cell activity of the T2 response produces the antibodies that will clomb onto the antigen, and then it needs the visceral or surface or general response, which is the macrophage action to produce like pus and a discharge to get it out. Now, this is very key understanding to hold not only in relationship to vaccine injury, because what's happening with that, where you inject the pathogen into the body, bypassing the peripheral immune system, And the science of the vaccines have realized that that methodology does not stimulate enough antibodies to register what they call immunity. And what they've done to mitigate that is load the vaccines up with a ton of antigens to force the body into an artificial allergic immune response.
Whoa, an artificial allergic immune response.
That's exactly what it is. So the more, and so when they first, like right now, Merck is under fraud investigation because in the MMR vaccine, the mumps wasn't producing enough antibodies according to their standards and what they have. So they took like mumps injected into mouse serum and added the mouse antibodies to the test, and then, oh yeah, sure, it produces enough like that. So,
wow, that's just, whoa, and it's painful. The whole ideology is painful, abysmally painful to what you're saying is just, wow.
Yeah. So then I want to add one other piece is that infants' immune systems are naturally suppressed in utero. Mothers' immune systems are naturally suppressed. It's not a bad thing. This is a survival thing for the mother and the baby. So the mother's immune system doesn't attack the baby, and the baby's immune system doesn't attack the mother. It's and when the infants are born, they're, for the first year of life, I mean, it's a gradual progression, their immune systems are also naturally suppressed, and that's naturally suppressed to not produce antibodies. So when you have that in mind with the idea of, well, one of the reasons why they added all the adjuvants is because they're giving vaccines to infants, and the infants aren't making antibodies, and so they think, okay, we need to dump in a bunch of aluminum to force their immune systems out of that naturally suppressed state to put them into allergic response, basically is what happens. So that's one of the first steps of vaccine damage.
Now, it's an allergic response. Vaccine damage is
an allergic
response by the body.
Not an immune response. Because that's why kids who have been vaccinated can get the disease, because they never got the general immune system response, which is the fever, localization, and discharge, because it was all bypassed via injection. So the methodology of vaccination has some pieces about how the immune system works, and then it's tried to skew the science to force the immune system to do something which is abnormal, and then you get what basically is, vaccine damage. So that's on the one side of the issue. The other side of the issue is that, yes, some states would accept antibodies as a bypass to getting a vaccine. So if you had natural disease exposure, you have antibodies. If you had previous vaccines, you can have antibodies. I say can have antibodies because I've seen fully vaccinated kids that have no antibodies. Means that they were non-responders, they didn't produce antibodies, or they produced a general immune response and cleared the vaccine and didn't have antibodies. And I've also seen kids that have been fully vaccinated and their antibody titers are 40 or 50 times what was considered immunity, but they're showing that they still have active disease even though they had the vaccine 7 or 10 years ago.
Wow.
Right? Because that allergic response is continuing to say, there's measles running around your system.
Where is it? You're like,
is it? Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. Wow.
So then there's one more piece is now because the states are realizing that parents are finding a way out of getting vaccines by producing titers. New York passed a law that even if you have titers, you still have to get the vaccine. Which then now it becomes something illogical. What are these laws? I mean, it was already illogical from the first few things that I've said, but now we've reached a state of madness, because are you really just wanting to ensure that children are protected from these diseases if protected is the desired goal? If they have antibodies technically they are. So why would they need another vaccine?
Yeah.
So what would be the reason to be injecting foreign host DNA, aluminum adjuvants, multiple disease agents under duress? I mean, what would that purpose be? And this is, so I haven't yet got to talk about homoprophylaxis, but this is the crux of where we are. This is what I really want to get across, is that right now, none of this stuff is making any sense. They've changed science to satisfy a public policy, which has nothing to do with the recipient of this public policy or their health outcomes. So there's other forces at play, and this whole vaccine discussion is to really start sinking into what the thinking is behind that. So in my office, we make homeopathic vaccine detox remedies for a number of practitioners who work through our office. And we get their vaccine records and we get their medical history, and we're trying to piece out, how are we going to best help this child? And even in my own case-taking processes, I get these medical histories and I go through it step by step. Oh, first they were happy and well. Then they had the vaccines. Then they had the ear infections, and then they had the antibiotics. And then they developed the asthma. Oh no, but there was a few more vaccines in there. And then they're given the steroids. And then a few years go by. Now they're diagnosed with speech delay, and they get referred out to OT. And then the next set of vaccines comes, and now they're diagnosed with autism. And meanwhile, they've had all these other drugs in the way. And so this whole relationship of the parents and the doctors and this child, which the child is the innocent one in this, is what exactly are the parents trying to satisfy in themselves by subjecting their child to a medical system that is trying to satisfy something else, and meanwhile nobody's paying attention to what's happening to the child. Like there's that disconnect. And then they come to homeopathy 7 years, 15 years after the fact, right?
That's intense.
That's so intense. Because we're like, okay, what is it in the thinking process? Okay, so we can go back. So this is some of my work, is really looking at, what is that process when an animal has a baby? Yeah. And how they will fight off, defend and hold that baby, and they live in their den, and they, their mother's milk is everything that baby needs. The dirt on the floor of the den is everything that immune system needs to figure out how to live in this world, right? So just a very sort of visceral, instinctual place that somehow humans, so the mother who, okay, maybe that fear is the one that says, okay, I'm going to get a vaccine to protect my child from infectious disease, because that's been the model that's projected out there. So if we were to introduce homeoprophylaxis into this conversation, homeoprophylaxis starts with the concept that actually infectious disease is not the big bad meanie. Yeah. That these immunological processes that the infant and the toddler and the child and that everybody goes through is, how do they interface with the environment? How do they produce an immune response? So it's the immune response that's generated that actually helps to enable that person to exist in the environment. So, just switching for a minute back to the vaccine paradigm, where it's gotten so crazy that, if you sneeze, you're exciting a fight-flight response in somebody, right? Because they've become so paranoid disease, um, which fear state is what's also going to allow disease to come. So what is disease actually doing? And it's really interesting just watching this whole rabbit hole of the coronavirus situation. Now, actually, I just read a very interesting piece, is that somewhere along the idea that the WHO decided to make some bonds available for sale so
Yeah.
people could invest in there not being a global epidemic.
What? Right?
Financially, there's $425 million of these bonds out there.
Wow.
That investors have put their money in, which is, if the WHO declares that there is a pandemic, then all those investors will lose their money.
Wow.
So that's, one economic trade, anyways, what we're dealing with infectious disease is people's like sci-fi, horror mentality or whatever. We've invented this world where it's just become absolute craziness when we're dealing, and the whole goal of survival is that immune system took 5 billion years to develop.
Good point.
DNA, how do we work? The first mitochondria or bacteria with little DNA floating around inside of them. And then they were engulfed by larger cells, and then the mitochondria helps respirate the cell, and then the DNA. And as this organisms got more and more complex and have more and more challenge to ensure their own survival, the DNA has continued to advance and advance and advance. And, we've had vaccines for, the first ones I think were developed in the 1930s or something. Anyways, less than 100 years, vaccines have been in humanity. And certainly there were plagues that came along and infectious disease that came along. And on the larger scale, when you step back and you go, okay, there was always some evolutionary process that happened with these infectious diseases. One of them is to clean up the sewer from the water. Like that is a major advancement in civilization. We are getting cholera because the wells are contaminated. So, Minnesota actually has a bill on the floor giving people paid leave if their children are sick. Good idea.
Yeah.
Not mandate vaccines to force the child to go to school and shed the viruses. No, if your child is sick,
stay home.
And everybody in the house gets measles, and you're all good. And when you're better, you go back to society. And meanwhile, the child has this evolutionary process that they've been able to go through with the measles. So going back to homeoprophylaxis, then all of this has been, just sort of laying the groundwork for how can we comprehend homeoprophylaxis.
Mm-hmm.
So the process with homeoprophylaxis, by introducing a homeopathic preparation of infectious disease agent, you're activating the immune system. It's taken orally, and the immune system begins to respond as if it's seen this infectious agent. Mm-hmm. But the difference is, because it's a homeopathic preparation, there's nothing in it. It's been diluted and diluted and diluted, and what's left in the solution is the memory of that infectious agent. Mm-hmm. But because we're energetic beings, that our immune system is actually pre-keyed by the DNA to recognize human pathogens.
Yeah.
We're pre-keyed to know these diseases and to develop immune responses to it. That's why we don't get pig diseases or cow diseases or so on and so forth. Now, the situation with the coronavirus, if I can bring that up,
this
is a man-made virus that's got, it's a conversion of a bad virus and other DNA. They found that there's HIV DNA in there and other DNA, and so now what we're doing is we're introducing other animal species DNA as an infectious agent into our bodies to see what kind of response there's going to be, right? And this is where some of the stuff is coming out about that. But anyways, going back to what is natural disease and what is the natural pre-keyed immune response, that when in an HP remedy, it touches our mucous membranes, it activates a mild fever, a mild discharge, the immune system is learning. There's no active disease, and so it passes by, right? There's no shedding because there's no viral particle in it. So it's only the experience of the recipient who's taking the HP. The one interesting thing that happens, though, is because, like, I don't know if you've seen those videos where the sperm enters the egg and the egg lets off this little, like, cloud.
Yeah.
And that stops the other sperm from coming in.
Yeah.
That is like this energetic phenomena that cell has.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
When you have a family that takes the whole remedy together, it changes their energetic frequency.
Wow.
Collectively. And the same is true, like an epidemic of disease happens when a group of people have a collective susceptibility.
Yeah.
Means they're all weak on the same level. And an infectious disease agent comes in, and then that society transforms in a way to maybe some people will die, the weak ones will die, the DNA adapts, whatever it is in the environment that we need to clean up. I mean, that infectious disease agent is actually not the cause, but the result of the sickness that was already there to begin with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You see? Okay. So then what are we doing with HP? As it's stimulating the general immune system, and as there's no antigen there, just energetics, we're inducing general immune system immunity, lessen susceptibility to contracting the disease, but more than likely no antibodies. So going to the original question,
okay.
does HP make antibodies?
Yeah.
Right? Now we understand how or why. So I couldn't just answer that question.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely fascinating. You're such a wellspring of knowledge. Thank you. And you articulated so well. So I'm like, wow, that's fascinating stuff. Years of study, I imagine, to like gain all that information. So thank you, though, because wow.
It's 25 years of practice and 20 years of working with vaccine damaged children and 12 years of working with homeoprophylaxis.
So to back up a little bit, where we were talking about a child who's injured and like this years and years of medical stuff that's added on top of that injury that probably isn't noticed in the first place, that this is stemming from a vaccine injury. So a child comes into you with years of problems and ill health, and then on top of that, on top of the original assault to the immune system, you've got all this other stuff. How do you start the process of healing with that child? And is it possible? Is it possible to recover back to a state of homeostasis where there's balance back in the body after such an injury and years of other types of drugs and treatments on top of that?
Well, I can say that when I first started practicing homeopathy in the 90s, I was seeing kids with ear infections and ADD and ADHD. And in the 90s, as a homeopath, these kids were responding pretty quickly to 3 or 4 remedies. You know, some of them had vaccines. There weren't that many vaccines. 95, they introduced the chickenpox vaccine. 89 was the hepatitis B vaccine, but that was, I wasn't seeing that was introduced into high school kids and newborns. So then there was, a gap of kids in between there that hadn't gotten that hepatitis B vaccine. And then it wasn't until actually 2000 that I started seeing my first autistic cases.
Yeah.
And as far as the system of homeopathy is, it is a 200-year-old science, and it was developed at a time when people were relatively healthy. And we have a concept in homeopathy where basically the idea is that there's a single disease and you treat that single disease with the one remedy.
Yes.
The thing of it is we have complex disease now. And the more vaccines that are added, the more complex the disease becomes. And as I've gone down the way and failed many children, either from my lack of understanding or parents' lack of understanding of the process too, I've learned more, keep learning more, and certainly the cases have gotten more and more complex. And I'm also going down the road that this goes back to one of the first things that I said was, this mother with the baby, her instinct about that baby is lost. But before that, the instinct about birth is lost. So one of the pieces that I'm noticing is how Pitocin is playing a major role in the immune system function. And I'm just piecing it together now because we're seeing, and then more than that, in vitro or artificial stimulation of the eggs sets off the whole endocrine system in a skew, which then compounds immune system, how immune system is functioning. And, these women, I want a baby, and their bodies are just not yielding a baby. One of the things that I do believe that comes from is because they were actually given the MMR vaccine when they were in children. And mumps, we know, if you've got the acute disease, it can metastasize to the gonads or the ovaries and make sterility. And so, what I can say we're working with is a very deep sickness in our own experience of this life and lack thereof of realizing our incredible creation, how we were designed. And medical interventions come in, and and I'm not saying this out loud, but nature has a way of taking out the dead trees, taking out the weak animals. This is the whole Darwin's evolution, that this is a way, when we are to actively apply those concepts of like the Holocaust, it's not a helpful model for humanity, right?
Yeah.
So how do we step into nature? And first of all, how do we step into the nature of ourselves?
Yeah.
Not try, beg and twist and deal. Like science has done so much, but science has gotten us to this place that we are so sick that we can't procreate. Our children are, so answering your question, there are some children who fully recover from vaccine damage. It's compounded by the Pitocin, compounded by in vitro fertilization, it's compounded by strep B antibiotics. If the healthy biome does not lay itself at the foundation of that child's entrance onto this planet, repairing the gut can take years. And those of you who are maybe listening will know this, that they have done everything to try to repair the gut. Homeopathy can help. We have bowel nosodes. We have intestinal lining remedies. We have other things that close the tight junctions down. We have, there's many things to do that. People are afraid of fevers.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one.
A huge one. If you give Tylenol, you can give so much Tylenol that you destroy the growth plates of your children. Wow. Because it basically lowers the fever by destroying the red blood cells. So if you keep giving
Wow.
Tylenol and you keep giving Tylenol, you make the child anemic, and then eventually you go in and you destroy the growth plates of the bones. And then the child isn't growing and has no immune system whatsoever. So being scared of fevers is one, if we can say, disease process that the more Tylenol you give does not solve that disease process in the parent who wants to give the Tylenol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that parents can look at is figuring out how to support fevers, and this is a great place where homeopathy has so many remedies for fevers. You know, belladonna, aconite, pulsatilla, chamomilla, and you can learn these things and do these things yourself and then work with a practitioner if the child's not getting better or something like that. So that, and I think fear of fevers, you know, probably started in around the 1800s with scarlet fever. And ever since then, it's just been a mindset, oh, can't let your kid have fever. But anybody who's had many children, finally they're like, they're healthy children, is like, we let that fever go. We just make sure they're hydrated, give vitamin C, you know, whatever it is that's needed, and remedies to help that process. So in the process of vaccine clearing or repairing the child, not only are we needing to repair the child, but we also need to repair the parent's methodology or understanding of the disease that the child has, because they're the ones that created the sickness in the child to begin with by going to the doctors. And well, the doctors did it too, but ultimately the doctor's no longer helping your child because they say that there's nothing we can do. So it's back on the parents.
Yep.
Thing. Yeah.
So I had a question come in. Somebody asks if the homeopath, let me just see, it was a good one. They read that detox doesn't remove the toxins from the vaccine. Is that true? Can you get the toxins out of the body through detox? Which
Yep.
you kind of did answer that earlier, but
I'll be more specific.
Yeah.
So there's a few different things. First of all, a vaccine is an infectious agent,
Yeah.
which requires an immunological process to resolve.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If there's no immunological process that has completed, i.e. no fever has been allowed to happen, no discharge has been allowed to happen, i.e. if Tylenol was given or antibiotics were given when the child got pus in their ears, then that infectious agent is still operating in the system. And that infectious agent will go to its organ of affinity. So hepatitis B is a liver virus. It's going to go into the liver and change the methylation pathways in the liver. Measles, it's going to go to the intestinal tract, either causing inflammation there or the meninges causing inflammation in the brain. Okay, so infectious disease, DTaP, those are all neurotoxins. So the pertussin part makes tics, facial grimaces, things like that. The whooping cough part is also then making spasms and contractions, so that's happening in the body. And diphtheria has a tendency towards a septicemia or inflammatory on the surface membranes, right?
Yeah.
So whatever the disease is its original pathology is going to be acting out in the body until you can immunologically process that disease out. So that's one piece of the toxins in vaccines. Okay, so is it really a toxin? This requires an immunological process that once the immune system has completed the antigen antibody complex and discharged it out with the fever, you can reduce the effect of the infectious agent in the body. The other toxins that is all the aluminum salts. So aluminum has two toxicological pathways. One, aluminum itself is a neurotoxin.
Yeah.
Two, aluminum changes the immunological T1, T2 ratio. So the T2 ratio is all that allergic response that I was talking about, and it's suppressing the T1 response. So you cannot clear the immunological agents without clearing the aluminum functional disturbance that is always going to produce an allergic response as opposed to the febrile response. So that's a functionality issue that needs to be corrected as opposed to a toxicological issue.
Mm.
Aluminum also produces neurotoxicity of slowing down the nerve axons and killing off brain cells and so on and so forth. That is just a mineral toxicity issue that the vitamin C and Fiji water and other remedies can help to do. And then we have the other ingredients in the vaccines. So,
Man, it's intense.
it's so intense. Polysorbate 80 makes the surface membranes permeable. So normally, infectious disease is an extracellular activity unless it's a viral pathogen that joins onto the coat of the cell and inserts its DNA and changes the DNA in that. But because there's a layer of the cell, that's a phospholipid membrane, that is supposed to close everything off. Well, what happens is polysorbate 80, that's what they put in salad dressing to emulsify oil and fat. It's in the vaccine.
That's scary. That's terrifying.
It is. This is like a mad scientist at the petri dish trying to change the reality of this planet. And this is a sentence that I came up with the other day. And as soon as we figure this out, that some people have said, this is how this planet works. And we're going to force you to accept that this is how the planet works. And if you don't accept what we say it is, we're going to imprison you, take your children away, do all these crazy things to you, because this is reality. And that is their reality. It's not my reality. And the sooner we realize this, the sooner we realize that, you know, it's the reality of the parent who takes the child to the doctor and the doctor who injects the child. It's the reality of the child. It's all that. But that is not reality. That is a man-made, artificial construct of what humans as conscious beings are here on the planet for.
Oh, wow. You're a wellspring. I appreciate you so much, Kate. This has been, I know we're running short on time that you had to go. We've got about 10:50 now. Oh man, wow. Some really deep things to consider here.
What I just want to say with that, because it's like coming out to everybody, and just to take a deep breath and just find yourself. Find yourself. And when we know ourselves, when we truly know ourselves as conscious beings that are living in this material world, and that consciousness lives forever.
I love that.
Then we can start to look at the pieces of our body and go, wow, you're not working very well today. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
And consciousness is what's created this whole existence anyways. So that is our own salvation, is to realize that in ourselves. And then we can begin to make choices and participate how we're going to participate. And so one of the pieces that, and especially women, we're just coming into our own, you know.
That's right, mamas.
This is my body. This is my life. We are the procreators.
Yes.
Without women knowing how to have babies, and without women being able to protect their babies and nurture their babies, this whole experiment is over. So it's for us.
Amen. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And there was one mom, and I just want to say this to her, who said about feeling guilty that it's all her fault that her children have suffered. And I think what you said really kind of pulls that all together. And I just want to say to those moms out there, don't feel guilty. Don't beat yourself up. You're conscious now. You've awoken. Use that energy. What would you say to that? I know we're getting low on time, and this has just been an absolutely wonderful show. Thank you so much, Kate. So what do you say to that mom who's heartbroken about some of the decisions that have left her child or herself not well?
Yeah. This is a heavy one, and you know, in our own we've all participated. We've all participated through our inadequacies and um, and laziness or other pieces. The only place is to start with compassion for yourself, how you came to that. What were the choices that where were the places where, like I might have said the last time, but when I had my baby, he's 34 now, no longer my baby, but I still like that part.
Yeah, of course. They're always our babies, no matter how old they get. It doesn't matter. Doesn't
And
matter.
the doctor's like pulling out the vaccines, and I'm like, I noticed my heart kind of flutter and my stomach get tight in a knot, and she's like, well, just put it in his leg right here. And she did it so stealthily, like he didn't notice and I didn't notice, and then pretty soon he's screaming. And but in the 3 seconds in there, I had a visceral response.
Yeah.
And that visceral response was my instinct. And, Catholicism has made it so that, any instinctual part is animal. We actually try to cut that off and don't listen to that part. Well, that part is actually our survival. We need instinct. And, he was vaccinated, and then on the drive home, he went into high-pitched screaming. And I'm like, oh, I'm a bad mom. Like, how come I can't calm my baby down? I don't know these things. I was young. I was 21 years old. Like, just like fresh out of the box myself. Like, what?
Yeah.
So just to have compassion for ourselves and the vulnerability, and to remember, we need to remember those places. And it's all across the board. I just was in a 10-day Vipassana course in India, and just settling into my own life and how in my own self I've let so many people transgress against me for my own fears.
Yeah.
And compassion inside for my fears has, one, helped to rectify all of those relationships, and that is the deepest healing that we need now. I mean, as a collective, we look outside and we want to be obedient to being the good citizen, or this is part of our nature also. So have compassion is like, oh my goodness, I just trusted these doctors, because trust is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we if we can get wrapped around this whole place of what's happened with humanity. Anyways, this is the work we need to do.
I really thank you so much, Kate. It's been a wonderful discussion. I know we're running low on time, and I just want to thank you. And let's try again for next Thursday, since we kind of booked that, if that still works for you. Yeah. And hopefully it'll work for me. Well, I'm here in Connecticut, and we're battling some heavy-duty legislation. So if I have to go into a hearing, or dealing with my own vaccine-injured child who is having some health problems right now. So it's just a balance, but I appreciate that this has worked out. We've had a bunch of viewers online. And I really appreciate our discussions. It's so heavy and so deep, and you're a wellspring of knowledge. It's wonderful to talk with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So, guys.
And I hope everybody who listens just takes some pause and feels themselves.
Yeah, and then real quick, for folks who are tuned in who haven't heard of you before, so it's free. I put it away somewhere, but your website is free.
freeandhealthychildren.org is the website for homeoprophylaxis. freeandhealthychildren.org.
And Kate's got a bunch of great books. This is one of them. I have a bunch. We have other stuff to talk about, even glyphosate, but we'll still stick on homeopathy next week, because it's just so deep, and we can do these shows as much as you're willing to, as I love talking to you. So Kate's got books and all kinds of wonderful stuff that you can go and check out on her website. And I'll put a link in the show after we close out, so anyone can reach out to Kate. And you're also a practicing homeopath.
Practicing homeopathy with a pretty full-time practice. So there's on freeandhealthychildren.org, we have parents start here, find a HP supervisor. There's many practitioners there that also know what I know, and work with families trying to sort it out.
Thank you so much. So that concludes our live broadcast for today, and you'll be able to, if you just tuned in, the show will be up and running and you can catch it from the beginning. It's also on YouTube, Periscope, and Twitter. And thank you again so much, Kate. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.